This is about your country. I'm merely just an individual that walks around speaking. You are the people who own this country for real. We're just guests. Since when is it okay for guests of Australia to be silenced, attacked, to be humiliated by the media only because they are white? Where did this special treatment come from? Lawrence Southern disagrees with me in just about everything. But why is it that Lawrence Southern says we want strong immigration policies, we want a stronger country, we want to conserve the true Australian values, we want to protect the host culture? Why is she attacked by the media? I here, as a Muslim Imam, I have a question. Did she disrespect the Anzacs like Yasmin did? No. Did she call Australia an abusive boyfriend? Why? Why do you give us this special treatment? Why have you sold your country, the Greens and the Labour Party? In 2016, I moved to Adelaide. And many of you seen me meet with so many of these politicians. All of them were useless. The Labour Party and the Greens, along with these channels, are lying to you. And they're not getting away with it because Australia is a country that has a population that is very aware and educated. You can't fool us. Thank you. And because of that, I congratulate you all on having this dignity and pride for your country. And I honestly believe that my presence here, although many people wish to ignore, is a statement. Although unexpected, but at times we really need to wake up. What's happening in Australia is not only foolish, it's very dangerous. You've seen what happened in Toronto, a shooting, all of a sudden mental illness. Who is diagnosing all these people? I want to see this doctor. What kind of a religion is this? Everyone that hits the news has a mental illness. The left are the real bigots. The left are the real bigots. They are the ones, when they see a peaceful Muslim, they turn around and they say, no, he's a fake. Because Muslims can't be like that. Muslims have to be like the terrorists. And we need to tolerate and understand them. And I say no. It's time we literally cut this nonsense out. And we woke up as a nation. Minority groups that have honest individuals will always be welcome. But for as long as I stand and for as long as I breathe, I will never allow anyone to lie to you. On Sunrise, where I taught Jamal Rifi a lesson to never lie to the Australian people, I will make sure that our voice is heard in Parliament, but at the same time, we need to open doors and open opportunities for people like Lawrence Southern to come and speak. Because Australia has values that say, even though I don't agree with you, or maybe I do agree with you, I agree with her on just about everything, she's never lied to me, not once. You will always be welcome to speak. And the people protesting us, if I was there, they would have been Islamophobes. Lucky them, they got away with it. Before I leave you, I've only got a few minutes. Many people ask me, Imam, why don't you leave Islam? And there are many reasons why I don't. In fact, even if I wasn't Muslim, I would still come back to Islam. Imagine waking up in the morning and finding free bacon outside your house. God bless you all.
Adelaide, and so far I've absolutely loved my Australia experience. Melbourne was a little bit of trouble. Everyone's saying, look out for Melbourne, but I feel like our trip there is kind of like in the Bible when you had Abraham begging with God, please don't destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. If I can find 10 good people here, don't destroy it. And this is the question, do we or do we not nuke Melbourne? Well, we found a few hundred good people there, so we'll have to hold off on the nuking of Melbourne. But seriously, I love this country, but in all of my years of political commentary, political activism, I don't think I have ever been so lied about in one place. Your press is absolutely insane. Obviously, I haven't been lied about by the people in this room, but if you're standing outside of here, if you're protesting, if you're shrieking into the wind in the streets, there's a good chance you think we're just here for 2 hours, screaming slurs like we have racist Tourette's. Or, I don't know, what do they think we're doing in here? Maybe we're summoning Poseidon with esoteric rituals and electrocuting puppies to create Frankenstein versions of good old Uncle Adolf. The things that they accuse us of are pretty nuts. But let's seriously look at some of the things that they have said about me. I've got some compilation of tweets here. So, Lauren Southern is a fascist. She is an anti-migration extremist. A xenophobic cretin, a alt-right white supremacist darling. That's nice, that's not so bad. This was the Herald Sun. I think they said I was a hate speech espousing, oh, and then here we go, terrorist, who illegally opened fire on immigrant vessels in the US. Something they said. That is a lot to achieve for a 23-year-old little blonde girl. I don't know, I'm a little proud of myself, to be honest. Let's seriously look at this. What most of these claims are from the press, the tweets, the Antifa, they're just slander. And I'd like to say that these weren't intentional. I'd like to say that they were negligent. But even if we were to assume the press were being negligent, at best, it would be a game of media telephone where everyone is speaking different languages and half the participants are deaf. But unfortunately, I'm not actually convinced that this had to do with negligence or any sort of mistake at all. The press have been intentionally attempting to slander Stefan and I. It was rather dark and rather insidious. They want us to be attacked the way we are being attacked. People throwing bricks, people trying to push over the trains that are coming to see our speech. They want this to happen, and that's why they lie about us. They have spent so much time attacking caricatures of nationalists, attacking caricatures of right-wingers, that the press have forgotten what their actual job is. That maybe they should be trying to find out where this resurgence of nationalism is coming from. Maybe they should try to find out why they're driving so many people to the right wing. Instead of conjuring up images of spidery black symbols on red flags and hand raised at 45 degrees to try and get clicks and generate outrage and money. Because media, quite frankly, you can cry Nazi all you want. You can imagine words shouted from underneath a little black mustache all you want. But all it has done is shown that your reaction is Pavlovian. It's not well-articulated rational thought. And I want to mention here as well that it's not particularly sensitive to the people who have actually been under horrible regimes to compare posting photos of Pepe and being anti-mass migration to being in a death camp. I don't know. Little difference there. It's kind of like these feminists who compare being whistled at to being gang raped. There's not even a little bit of similarity there. And it's an extremely irresponsible thing. It's funny because it's like, how can you possibly rationalize this? But it's also really sad because to compare our free speech and just discussing migration issues to these horrific crimes of humanity, to compare whistling to gang rape is to cheapen the actual experience of these things. It's to cheapen what these words mean. And it is a highly irresponsible act that the media should be ashamed of. So what should the media be doing? Instead of reminding us all that journalism degrees are simply barista certificates. What are they so afraid of Stefan and I coming here to speak about? Well, the globalization of humanity has introduced us with new and massive problems of identity, things that we've never faced before. Questions of who are we? What is the basis of our identities? Are we defined by religion, by ethnicity, by geography, by gender, by culture, or even by government? These questions are not simple questions at all, and those of us who have not found satisfactory answers, you can be forgiven, because to answer these questions is going to take a long, long, long time. The group of citizens who work within the Australian government have proposed some potential answers to these questions, and one of those answers is multiculturalism. And according to this document here, Australia's Multiculturalism Act, they have decided that Australian identity should not be based on race, on religion, or on culture, but on shared values such as freedom, democracy, the rule of law, and equality of opportunity. And that's fair enough. That is one legitimate proposal to a very thorny problem that we are facing. I don't agree with this answer personally, however, the proposal is legitimate nonetheless. You cannot fault someone for trying to propose an answer to a very difficult question to which no one seems to have the answer to. However, having proposed one solution does not mean that it is the correct solution. It does not mean that the conversation is over. It does not mean that we are finished and we must close off the inquiry. We had a final answer to how the solar system worked for a long while. The sun obviously orbits around the Earth, you idiots. This is settled science. Hashtag sun orbiting is our strength. Hashtag don't listen to anti-Earth bigots. It's very simple. However, it was through a process of open inquiry that we painstakingly became aware that just because we had an established answer for a long time did not mean it was the correct one. And the only reason that inquiry happened was because people like Galileo were willing to be persecuted for speaking up and offering other solutions. And I really hate it when people pretend, they look back at history and they point to things like Galileo and they say, oh, we're so much better than that. We don't persecute people for scientific inquiry anymore. We don't persecute people for blasphemy anymore like they did in the church. We're not better than that. We are no different. The only thing that has changed are the questions being asked and the things people are being persecuted for. So my point is that when it comes to the proposal that we should be multicultural societies, you do not have to immediately accept that answer. It is entirely valid that you are not satisfied and you continue to search. I will continue to give multiculturalism a fair shot. Indeed, to debate, to critique, to look into multiculturalism is part of giving it that fair shot. And despite the fact that I am increasingly unconvinced, I would never attempt to silence its defenders, because it is our willingness to consider the ideas of those with we disagree that gives us legitimacy to challenge them and to propose alternatives. And on the contrary, those who are unwilling to consider alternative perspectives, those who decide to put an end to inquiry altogether, they have chosen to relinquish the legitimacy of their critique, because the only people who can partake in discussions about the future of this nation are those who demonstrate a willingness to partake. The people that have been protesting our events, the people that are outside that have been trying to shut it all down, they are objectively ignorant of what is going on here. And they can't disprove their ignorance because they are against the idea of inquiry altogether. Not only are they opposed to becoming informed themselves, but they want all of Australia and all of New Zealand to be in the dark with them. They don't even want you guys in here to be informed. They plug out their own eyes and say, follow me, I see the path. The thing is, though, that as much as these protesters want to shut down these discussions, as much as they don't want us to ask these big questions, at some point or another, we are going to be forced to face them. You can't just sit around and hope that our future will go away, hope that these questions, we can maybe pass it on to the next generation. It's like the kid who never wants to commit to a path or a career, and they say, I don't really want to get out of university. I'm not sure which degree I should go with. Maybe I'll continue trying to become an actor, an artist. They want to leave all their options open. I think Jordan Peterson calls it the Peter Pan syndrome. And sure, maybe mom and dad gave them a bit of money that they can live off for a while they're trying to make these big decisions, but if you get to 30, if you get to 40, and you haven't made some choice on what your identity is, some choice on what path you are going to go down, well, that money's probably going to run out. And you're probably going to end up homeless or in some terrible situation. And I'm sure that individual who doesn't make those decisions is going to look back and say, darn, I wish I chose a career before I got this eviction notice on my doorstep. And this is much like our nations. Our forefathers left us with an identity. They left us with rule of law and language. Will we retain those things? Will we remain largely homogenous? How far can our tolerance for other cultures really go? If we stay in this limbo, while other cultures and progressive ideology chips away at our original identity, eventually the gift that our forefathers gave us will run out. So we can either answer these questions of identity now, with peaceful and well-mannered debate, or we can wait until that eviction notice is at our door. We can wait until the battle lines are drawn, and then we'll really see how far our tolerance can go. We have a responsibility to our children. We have a responsibility to ourselves, to our nation, to engage with these fundamental questions before we reach these potentially disastrous scenarios of religious, ethnic, and cultural conflicts, battling for who will own the soul of these Western nations we live in. These questions become particularly important when the solutions we've been given by our governments are so uninspiring. For example, the Australian government suggests that your identity should be based not on culture, but on values. So screw Western culture, you can just throw that out the window. According to your government, the West has nothing to do with the founding of this nation or the future of it. Even on its face, this proposal seems half-baked, because aren't values just a facet of culture? Isn't this just a reiteration of the suggestion that Australian identity is indeed based on culture? If you look at the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition of culture, it says the set of shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices that characterize an institution. And furthermore, the values listed by the Australian government, freedom, democracy, the rule of law, and equality of opportunity, not only are these values themselves a form of culture, but they are characteristic of one specific culture and one culture alone, Western culture. Everything that we value in the West, it did not just fall from the sky one day. It was the culmination of thousands of years of cultural cultivation, enlightenment, reformation, traditions, wars, and struggle for power. The dirt here is not magical as much as we would love it to be. You can't just hand someone some Vegemite and an Aussie bush hat and make them binge watch Crocodile Dundee and then suddenly hope they don't want to build a caliphate. That's just not how it works. Freedom of speech and the vast set of laws and literature defending its existence are rooted in European ideas and Western ideas. Free speech defense can first be found in Athens, to Rome, to the English Bill of Rights and the American First Amendment. I love the quote by Socrates. If you offered to let me off this time on the condition that I am no longer to speak my mind, I should say to you, men of Athens, I shall obey the gods rather than you. Democracy was invented in Greece, and then it was reinvented in America as a republic. The rule of law was invented in England. And if I'm being more specific here, of course, secular law. Law that was based on the rights of the individual. Law that considered all people equal. The people who came up with these ideas, like A.B. Dicey and John Locke, they came from England. So they say, your politicians say that here in Australia, your identity is not defined by culture, And then they cite culture as its defining characteristic. Multiculturalism is the consequence of the ideology of classical liberalism. The idea that we should have tolerance for all ideas and for all people of which we disagree. So, if respect for liberal Western principle is essential to multiculturalism, then what of those cultures that do not respect liberal values, who do not agree with the doctrine of tolerance? What about cultures that do not believe in the right of other cultures to exist? Should they give up their cultures when they enter our multicultural nations? If yes, then it's not really multiculturalism, is it? And if no, then is it okay that they continue to hate Western freedoms? And is it okay that they potentially continue to shut down other cultures? You'd think that the men and women who run our institutions, the politicians, the Harvard graduates and Princeton graduates, those elites in their ivory tower, you'd think they would have asked a few of these questions, because it's not that difficult. Is multiculturalism and the setting up of multicultural enclaves, or rather just cultural enclaves, that speak different languages, that have different religions, that won't do business with each other, is that not just the creation of balkanized states within a country? Is this not how countries formed originally? People who didn't want to be around each other and wanted different laws separated and then created nations? Why are we doing this within our own countries? And if we are really going to embrace this multiculturalism thing, if we're going to take it to its bitter end, does that mean that we now have to have witch doctors at our medical conferences? Does that mean we have to have them working in our government-funded hospitals? Because it wouldn't be very multicultural of us to just have Western medicine, would it? That would be Western supremacy, and that wouldn't be very good. And I guess we'll have to have astrologers at our scientific conferences, and certainly some cannibalistic cuisines. We must have those human thigh trucks. We can't forget the enrichment of the Papua New Guinean cultural experience. The term mental gymnastics to characterize modern leftist rhetoric about multiculturalism hardly does justice to this spaghetti of unanswered questions. So I have to ask, rather than saying that Australia is a multicultural country, why not just say that Australia is a Western country based on Western values? What incentive is there to pretend that Australia is multicultural? It does not inspire confidence, it does not inspire unity, and honestly, the government seems utterly unconvinced of its own solutions. So that there are those among us here that are unconvinced of the government's solution, that there are those among us who realize that there are some contradictions here, it's not a crime. It should not make you a pariah within our society. You are not literally Hitler just because you have the brain cells to rub together to see that there are some problematic issues with this multiculturalism thing. It doesn't even make sense in theory. So why are we legislating this? Do not let the slander, do not let the hatred of those who want to put an end to discussion stop your spark of curiosity and your drive for understanding on these topics, because it really will save the future. So I've now spent the whole first half of this speech explaining to you the legitimacy of this critique, and it sucks that I have to do this, but half the media here seems convinced that this conversation shouldn't happen at all. So hopefully this has convinced you that we do need to have some discussion. But let's get into the actual arguments now. What are the fundamental issues with multiculturalism? Well, if you listen to any part of the speech, I would say listen to this bit. Because multiculturalism and the changes that it will wreak are not something that are merely superficial. They're not simply cosmetic. Multiculturalization is a radical and extreme idea that uproots and overturns the very essence of what a nation is. To multiculturalize your country is like making your home a public space. Your house is no longer your space, it is everyone's space. You no longer have any more say in what happens in your space or to your space than anyone. To multiculturalize your space is to relinquish your autonomy and your sovereignty. It is to abdicate your authority to decide what happens in your domain. Indeed, it is to concede that this is no longer your domain and that you have no domain. It would be like if your spouse came up to you one day after a long and loving relationship and said, "I've decided I'm polyamorous." That wouldn't sit so well with many of us because we recognize that the significance of a marriage, the significance of a relationship is exclusivity. The heart that belongs to everyone belongs to no one. And the nation that belongs to everyone belongs to no one. And so accordingly, the question of multiculturalization should be treated with the same respect and deadly seriousness as any question that touches on that of a people's powers of autonomy and self-determination. It should not be left to a small group of elites, but just like Quebec, just like Catalonia, just like Scotland, multiculturalization should be put to a referendum after an informed and a thorough debate. And to those who would say that this debate is over, to those who would say that Westerners have already decided to take another path, they've decided to give up their identities. Even today in my home country of Canada, which legally became the first multicultural country, you guys were the second to kind of announce this, most people don't really know what multiculturalism even is. And in fact, they believe it is the opposite of what it is. Many Canadians seem to believe that multiculturalism means that Canada will accept people from all over the world and that those people will assimilate to a decided Canadian identity. And I was just recently on Sky News here, and even with your right-wing hosts, I was having this discussion, and they seemed to think that was the definition of multiculturalism as well. That is not what multiculturalism is. That is the opposite of what it is. Multiculturalism means that people come to Australia and they do not assimilate, thus resulting in multiple cultures. When they are actually asked, when Canadians are actually given a chance to give an informed perspective on this multiculturalism thing, 70% of Canadians say they wish that minorities and immigrants would do more to assimilate. So had this truly been put to a referendum, had Canadians truly been asked, do you want immigrants to come over here and create cultural enclaves, they would have given Canada a definitive no. And the American election, for the first time in a long time, it was based almost entirely on questions of identity, border, language, culture, religion. And Donald Trump, a Western chauvinist, won. And had immigration not been imposed on the American people for the past 50 years, he would have had the overwhelming majority. It's like Ann Coulter says, Obamacare never would have passed without decades of massive immigration from the third world. Liberals didn't change any minds, they changed the voters. The Western world did not decide to be multicultural one day. They didn't just wake up and say, I don't want my culture, or religion, or history. Screw that, we'll just throw it out the window. This was something that was imposed on us without our consent. And now every single day that this mass immigration continues is another day that you lose your sovereignty even further. So what is with this disconnect between the policies being imposed on us, between what the media is saying in favor of mass immigration and multiculturalism, and the actual people's opinions? Well, here's my perspective. I would say that the disconnect is a result of a massive suppression on the conversation of multiculturalism. Look at New Zealand's hate speech laws, or Canada's free speech caveats, the growing nanny state in ever multicultural London, which I'm banned from for exactly questioning this, or Australia's Human Rights Commission. The multicultural powder cake is so inherently volatile that it cannot be discussed. It cannot afford to look itself in the mirror. It has become increasingly evident that multiculturalism and free speech cannot peacefully coexist, because it seems that in every nation where multiculturalism has been introduced, The first rule of multiculturalism is you cannot talk about multiculturalism. Multiculturalism welcomes any and all perspectives and opinions, of course, except ones that are critical of multiculturalism. It's like saying that you can use any worshipful adjective you'd like to describe Stalin, and therefore you have free speech. Indeed, the suppression of free speech is a necessary component of the multicultural project. For multiculturalism to succeed, it must shelter itself from criticism and examination for as long as it can, until the point at which Westerners have become demographically outnumbered in their own countries. Because after that point, you have lost your powers to self-determination. You have lost your autonomy and your political strength has been crippled. The clampdown on free speech is simply the canary in the coal mine here as well. It is a foreshadowing of what the unworkability of multiculturalism will look like. If even today they refuse to allow a debate or a critique of these policies, then what will it look like in the future? At least it's not all over yet. Despite the fact that we had a lot of our venues cancel on us, we've had a lot of pushback. We weren't even sure if we were going to be able to make it to this country. The Australian people spoke up and they pushed the government. They pushed the press. They pushed everyone to allow this to happen. We made it happen, and we still have our ability to speak even though it is under attack. So thank you so much, first of all, to the Australian people and everyone in this room to push and fight for the speech. Just showing up here is a brave act. I understand the ostracization that happens, the attacks you get just for trying to listen to different opinions. And I will say, unfortunately, this attack on us will continue, and it will get stronger as this multicultural project continues. And that is because free speech is the antidote to multiculturalism. You don't have to take my word for it. We witnessed this happen in America. No man was more feared by the establishment than Donald J. Trump. The reason that he was so feared by the establishment is because every single thing he stood for threatened to set off the multicultural powder keg. While every other politician would bombard us with slogans like, diversity is our strength, or multiculturalism is the backbone of this nation. And of course, those weren't any of our thoughts in the crowd. They'd just been repeated to us so often that we're too afraid to question them. Trump was the first politician who refused to do this. And what he did is he uttered the words that Americans were too afraid to speak. We can all tell something is off. It doesn't make sense that we elect politicians who pretend to love our nations, who pretend to love our countries, and then undermine our national spirit at every single turn. They call us post-national states like Trudeau. They open our borders. They erase our anthem. Figure out. And Trump's slogan of "Make America Great Again" was the cry of the rekindling of the American spirit. The collective spirit had a unique identity in which Trump recognized could not live within a multicultural society. His rhetoric, and the rhetoric of other nationalists, is a threat because it is true that multiculturalism is a powder keg, and to speak of it directly is to threaten to set it off, for questioning it could light the match that causes it to explode. And that match is the minds of the people. The people who in America had finally had articulated for them the first time the views that they had implicitly felt for so long, and which you probably feel as well, the views that you no longer have a national spirit or identity, and that they did not know what the future of their own lives or their children's lives would look like, what language they would be speaking, what laws they would be ruled by, what God they would worship. And there can only be one answer to those questions, not multiple ones. And most civilizations in the world, they are well aware of this. It's why you won't see Japan droning on about diversity. It's why you won't see Saudi Arabia pushing for multiculturalization. You'll never hear this kumbaya nonsense in the rest of the world. It is only Westerners in our great decadence and naivety that have not accepted this truth. And I want to point out here that this is not necessarily a fault of the West or the men who founded these great Western nations we live in, but it's a cycle, and a very unfortunate cycle of human civilization that we constantly see. Many of you have probably heard it. Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times, and good times create weak men. We are in the stage of weak men living in good times. And because the times are still good, we act like we succeeded at creating them, when in reality, we are undoing it all. All of the things our forefathers gave to us, and headed once again into that phase of hard times. And don't let yourself become comfortable just because that process may take another 100 years. As in Canada, and I suspect in Australia as well, there is a great deal of opposition to multiculturalism and mass migration. Of course, we can see it in this room here. But just as in Canada, the debate is heavily, heavily oppressed. Those who oppose these policies are afraid to speak. People are afraid to question and to criticize because of the persecution they will endure. People are socially bullied and ostracized. They're fired from their jobs and even physically assaulted. And hate speech laws further dampen this public debate for fear that their dissenting opinions will invite not just violence from people, but violence and oppression from their governments. But if Canadians and Australians continue to allow themselves to be oppressed and pushed into submission and silence, then the West will die with us. And in fact, so will this short-lived multicultural project, because the most authoritarian and dominant culture will win. People are desperate for an identity. It's why the kids born in Muslim households in Britain tend to pull much higher in sympathy for Islamic extremism. Second generation are not even assimilating because the culture they should be assimilating to has decided to commit suicide. And so they work towards the goal of creating their own monocultures. And whoever is the most dominant will win. And the multicultural project will die with that win. Many of you here probably didn't even know that fact about second generation immigrants. And that is because we are told that people assimilate so well. But that is demonstrably false in Europe right now. So why don't you know this? Why aren't you told these things about assimilation? Once again, this information has been hidden from you. It has been sheltered to protect this failing experiment. And there are many of us who have stood here and embraced the end of this discussion. They think, if I speak up, I will be persecuted. And therefore, they do not speak up. They embrace their oppression, they take their place down on their knees, and they watch as their civilization is defiled and denigrated in front of them. And some of them even convince themselves that that's what they want. That's what they prefer. But if you ask me, the fact that we are persecuted for speaking up is not an excuse to stay silent. Instead, it is all the more reason why we are obligated and duty-bound to express ourselves and to voice our opposition. To allow ourselves to be bullied into submission, as leftists like to do to us, would be a shame and an embarrassment, and a failure to our ancestors who fought and died so we could live in the greatest civilization on earth. Mark Twain said that at the beginning of a change, the patriot is a scarce man, and he is brave, and he is hated, and he is scorned. But when his cause succeeds, that's when the timid join him. For then, it costs nothing to be a patriot. And I look forward to the time where it costs nothing to be a patriot, and I hope you join me in fighting for that. Thank you so much, Adelaide.
once again give you guys a headache. God bless you. Can we have one more round of applause for Lawrence Sutton, please? And if they tell you Australia is racist, I'll go to some of the loud you guys. I love you guys. Just to give a few examples of how multiculturalism has failed. Pretty funny that I'm saying it. In 2006, the Mufti of the Muslims in this country, his name was Tajuddin al-Hilali. And many of you might remember that time when he said that Australian women being raped by Muslim men should have covered themselves because walking on the street uncovered is like uncovered meat, and when cats see uncovered meat, they eat it. And John Howard was very right when telling him to put a sock in his mouth. But that wasn't the only problem. But look, the solution for these problems isn't itself a problem. So we had one mufti who made this problem. The government came and said, all right, look, let's solve this problem. They made a council of imams. Now instead of one problem, we have multiple problems. The second guy came in, Fahmi Naji, first day in office, and said, I don't know if Osama bin Laden is really responsible for 9/11. The third guy, the Grand Mufti, Ibrahim Abu Muhammad. And look, this is our tragedy, and this is our leaders. He came out and he said, well, you know what? Islam has a very strong stance against homosexuality and how they are treated. And if you try to change that, that will create radicalization in this country. So trying to change the killing of gays and throwing them off buildings, that in itself will create radicals. But the solution is the same problem. And so the issue continues. But where does it really hurt the nation? Where does it really hurt the nation? It hurts the nation when these communities make schools, and I went to these schools. I was raised in a Muslim private school in Western Australia, an Islamic college. In one of these books, they taught me that Prophet Muhammad, in one night, would satisfy 11 of his wives in one night. And that he had the power of 30 men.
Muhammad was gay.
I raised my hand as an innocent boy. I said, I have a question. What was his diet? It shouldn't be wrong to laugh at yourself. It's in fact very healthy. It's good to have this debate, to laugh. It's good to ridicule books that deserve to be ridiculed. And therefore, I believe that what's happening in this country right now is exactly what this country needs: freedom of speech. In a way that's very audacious, no one has ever seen before. Say it because you're Australian. Say it because you believe in freedom of speech. Do you know how many returned ISIS jihadists Muslim countries have taken? 0. We have them running around. Next person I'd like to welcome is an educated man, a man that has influenced tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people around the world through his videos and research. His knowledge about Islam and the Middle East and the issues facing the West, absolutely phenomenal. A man who, when he speaks, is completely honest. Tears come down from his eyes. I'd like to welcome to the stage my brother and friend, Stefan Molyneux.
It is such a pleasure to be here with you guys. It's a nice, it's an intimate crowd. So I'm just going to sit, we'll talk, and I do a little bit of back and forth because you can see me on the screen anytime without being back and forth. I see a lot of great haircuts, like the top of great haircuts because of the lights. So I'm sorry if I can't point to you directly, but we'll do a little bit of back and forth because I don't want this to be like a big lecture kind of thing. So I want to thank you all so much for coming out tonight, for braving the 5 protesters, which I think is 3 biceps. I've been sort of working this. I was talking with the security guys who are, by the way, fantastic, and there's a kind of an analogy that happened tonight. Maybe you guys can help me work on it. I'm trying to figure out how best to do it. So it was raining this evening, and the protesters were out there, and they look sad. It's a little sad, because the little blue rinse. It's like tears in the rain, like it's sad. It's a little heartbreaking, because it's not like they have an excess of love and happiness, and so the security guys were looking out at these little waving their signs like, you hold it up. I do exercise, I have to lift to clean. It never comes clean, that. Actually, I can do this. See, I can lift stuff. Sorry? 2 biceps, that's right. So, the protesters are out there, and they're looking kind of sad, and they're engaging in Lauren in a wonderful shriek fest where she tries to give them some reason and evidence that they give them, massive amounts of decimals. And the security guys are like, they're getting wrecked. Sad. So they take out, such a sad metaphor for the West, they take out these umbrellas, right? Guys, it's so sad. Here's some umbrellas so you can protest without getting too wet. Because you know what happens to that witch in the movie, right? You get wet. So they're out there, wait, I have to hold this and the sign? Anyway, so a few minutes after they talk with Lauren, they decide that's enough. Because remember, nobody knows I'm here. I'm a ghost. You all fell asleep. This is just an illusion. Because according to the media, there's this incredibly hot Canadian woman. And some guy who looks a little bit too old to be her bodyguard. And so it's like, you're sad, they give you umbrellas. And then they decided to leave. They had to go to dinner. A bitter meal of deep-fried disappointment. So, question. Hands up, how many of you think we got our umbrellas back? I'm telling you, you're making us feel sorry for you. Here's our stuff. And you steal it. Welcome to Western immigration policy. See, I tied it all together. So, anyway, on with the speech. I'm known for my grueling intros. So, I wanted to do something Australia specific because you all are terrifying people and I didn't want you to be unhappy. And so I sort of, I like to start at the beginning, and I read about the brutal, vicious, genocidal conquest of the serene, noble savages that lived here perfectly in peace and harmony, loving each other, supporting women's rights, rejecting the fascism of clothing and hygiene. And toothpaste, combs. They were free. natural, beautiful, serene, and one with nature. And then, these claustrophobic, nasty Westerners came over and subjugated them with, well, I guess eventually things like penicillin and air conditioning and dentistry and, other things. So I did sort of read a little bit about, these history wars. You guys know these, what is it, the white blindfold and the black armband, right? Yeah, that's so. I was reading about this, and I was reading about these brave, edgy Marxist historians who, it's an odd coincidence, they decided to start slandering everyone within about 12 minutes of them dying. Because you see, once someone's dead, they can't sue you for slander or for libel, so you could say, oh yeah, the guy who just died was totally mean and evil and so courageous. Isn't that right? So I started doing reading about all of this, and it's really quite a narrative, like this whole fight, this real fight about, and it's right down to the base of what it means to be Australian, and it's not, of course, just Australia, right? I mean, this is in Canada, we have indigenous populations in America, of course, and so on. And it's a very important question, so I wanted to bring some of the research that I did, some philosophical questions, get some feedback from you guys about all of this, because it is very essential. There's a reason why the leftists will go straight to your legitimacy to exist as a civilization. They're not done. They're petty thieves, but they're not done. Because they want to go straight to the base of who you are, of whether you can have any crime, of whether you can justly admire the achievements of your ancestors, who, the Aborigines in Australia for about 40,000 years. And in about 0.5% of that time, your ancestors, have built shining cities out of the desert. That's incredible. I actually, in the last speech I gave, I said in 1% of that time, then a guy came to the signing table after, do come, I'd love to sign the books, came and he said, it's not 1%. Because he was a mathematician, so it really bothered him. It's like, and 200 years, 40,000, 0.5%. So I did say I would correct it, and I appreciate it. Look, there's a couple other mathematicians on that. They made that mistake. They couldn't sleep. No, I feel the same way. Somebody makes a logical error. And you see that, it's a great cartoon. It was from the early days of the internet. And it was the woman saying to the husband, come to bed, it's late. And he's like, I can't, there's still somebody wrong on the internet. I haven't slept in 11 years. Somebody wrong on the internet. So I decided to look into the Aborigine culture. That should come with like a hazmat suit and a warning and a bucket, and it's like, because I need to go to BC dances with about movie, and this Nova Savage thing has been around since Rousseau, and it's a very big deal, right, when we talk about the Nova Savage. I remember as kids, you guys see Roots, like the original, right, the Roots thing about, we're just all happy and then like people come along and spoil it with their freedoms and free market medicine and all that. And so I looked into it, and I began to see some patterns, which I think are very interesting, about the collision between these two cultures. Now, the Aborigine culture, if you want to know what fundamentally drives a culture, defines the politics is downstream from culture and so on. All beliefs are downstream from metaphysics, which is an annoying way of saying the study of what is reality, right? So in the West, we have this metaphysics that has been developed since the ancient Greeks. The big contributors, Aristotle, I would say, Plato was completely deranged with this regards to this stuff. But Aristotle, a very solid metaphysics. And many people kept that tradition alive. Even many of the Christian theologians kept it alive because they would recognize that there was a higher realm of heaven, but there was also a very practical, sensual realm of reality, and then Francis Bacon and a lot of the scientists have really worked with this metaphysics, which is there's an objective world out there that comes in through the evidence of our senses. We use reason to figure out what goes on in the world. You have to have experiments to figure out the truth. And your experiments have to be reproducible. You can't just say, totally happened, man. Like you have to give people a reproducible methodology, you've got some peer review, and eventually the marketplace tells you whether anything you did is worthwhile at all. So thank you for coming, because the market test is important for me. And just, you guys know what the name is of the Aborigines, their metaphysics, what do they call the world? Dream time. Dream time. Because it's really hard to spell. So walkabout is what they do in the dream time, right? Yeah, so they call it the dreaming or the dream time. Do you guys know what the major characteristics are? I feel like I'm giving you some horrible test, you know? What's that?
Rainbow serpent.
Rainbow serpent. Okay, you're having some kind of vision there, so just understand you're a rainbow serpent. The dance portion of the show comes a little later, along with the tearaway dance. I'm blind. 2 pillars of salt. Yeah, so the dream time, so that there's this cosmology about how the world was created, because as sentient bipeds, we're always curious about where the world comes from, and you look at the stars when you're a kid and you're like, what's going on? You have all these questions. So of course they believe that, and this is a general statement, some 600 different, right? There are bands, tiny little groups, like 25 people, then there are tribes, and more advanced cultures they get to tribes, and then they get to chiefdoms, and then they get to nation states and so on. So they believe that the universe was created by the ancient ones, the elders and so on, and it came out of a giant, featureless, empty space, like the conscience of a leftist, or I don't know exactly how they formulated it, or something like that. And then the elders, they went to sleep, like the conscience of the boomers. Ooh, no, there's the boomers here. But you guys are the good boomers, so that's all. And they gave the law. They gave the law. Now, it's not anything we would understand as the law. It's just, these are the customs, these are the rules, right? And some of them are like no incest, and some of them are just, rituals and so on, because they're both totemists and animists as a whole, right? So the animist is that everything alive has a soul. Everything that exists, like the microphone has a soul, the curtain has a soul, the stage, and so on. And the law that was given to the Aborigines in the dream time by the elders, the law can never, ever, ever change. There's no reform, there's no alteration, there's no negotiation, there's nothing. It can never, ever change. They have actually, the Aborigines have been called the most conservative religion, or the most conservative worldview of all time. I can't imagine what the police charged them to have an event there. Yeah, well, taxes, we don't use those for protecting you. So, you have a society in the Aborigines, you have a society in the Aborigines and have a belief system. Nothing changes. Now, as you probably noticed in your intellectual life, I mean, you all are here because you're curious people, right? Which means that you know the media lies about everything, so you want to come see for yourself, right? I feel like, I should bite the head off the head. Wait, are there any protesters? Okay.
Not in Adelaide.
Umbrellas on eBay. All right. So, nothing can change. Now, in the tug and play and pull and push of human society, things change for us, right? I mean, we've gone through this, as the West, the Western, the Europeans, the whites, whatever people say. We've gone through all of these amazing changes over the past couple thousand years. You could say 10,000 years ago when the agriculture was first formed, and we actually got enough calories to think about something other than food. And we're used to all of this change. Now, can you imagine? I don't know exactly, of course, nobody does, because, written language is a challenge for some cultures. And like reading for our leftist friends. And so we don't know when the dreaming began, but let's just say it's a long time. Thousands of years, could have been tens of thousands of years. And at least according to the oral tradition, nothing changes. So the question is, why does nothing change? Because they have these stories which even by anthropological standards seem a bit of a stretch, probability. anyone know how the sun is explained in this cosmology? Well, you get it. And this is what some cultures refer to as science. So, there's an emu and a crane. They both walk into a wall. No. So there's an emu and a crane, and they're fighting over the emu egg. And in the fight, the emu egg goes flying up into the sky, where for reasons that pass understanding, it stops and explodes into fire. And that's the sun. But, you know, it's a challenge, because sometimes it's cloudy. So, because before that, before the emu egg became the sun, everybody had to live by moonlight. And moonlight alone. Find things by moonlight. Like, you know, before you had a cell phone, it had that really ridiculous blinding battery, you had to grope around and find things in the dark. So, of course, you know, you can't have moonlight without the sun. So, that's no light. So the gods liked the fact that there was this sun. So what they did was the gods, as they would normally do, is they would gather up all the wood together, up all the wood, and they would light the fire every morning, and then that would be the sun. But they would only know to light the fire when they saw the morning star. Sometimes it's cloudy and you can't see the morning star. So they came up with a solution. What do we do when it's cloudy and we can't see the morning star? Well, the answer to this problem is, as you would imagine, the kookaburra bird. Just as Francis Bacon said. Only if we had a bird, we wouldn't need the science. Now, here is the audience participation part. As you Australians, I believe it is a citizenship test for you to be able to imitate. You don't want me to do it.
Do it!
Who is good at imitating the kookaburra bird? Come on. You've had a drink. Come on. And this is what you have a drink. Just imitate what it's That's just subtitles. That is not a bird. If a kookaburra bird isn't coming in and making with your vocal cords, now we're getting somewhere.
That was really good! That was really good.
Wait, is that my daughter?
Yep. That's me.
Anyone else? One more.
Go step.
All right. So the kookaburra bird would wake the gods up if they couldn't see the morning star, and they would remember to light the fire that is the sun. But the Aborigines said, you are not allowed to imitate the kookaburra bird. Blasphemer!
I'm a rule breaker.
And the reason you're not allowed to imitate the kookaburra bird is that the kookaburra bird might get offended.
Probably.
And if the kookaburra bird gets offended, it won't sing, or whatever horrible noise it makes. And if it doesn't sing, then the gods won't light the fire of the sun, and it's eternal darkness forever. No free speech to imitate the kookaburra bird, because people get offended. So you see where the leftists and the Aborigines, some things. Offense is the end of everything. Now, over the course of tens of thousands of years since this story originated, I'm sure that a few Aborigines were born who were like, that's what we got, really? And they had some questions. You know, I mean, there's a bell curve across different cultures, and, you know, you get smart people born into every culture. And so they'd be told all of this stuff. And they'd be told the cosmology, they'd be told why the stars are there, and you know, like, there'd be some skeptics, right? Like, some of the story doesn't really hang together too well, you know? Why can't the gods see a star? Why would the kookaburra bird get offended if it hears a kookaburra bird? Wouldn't that mean it would be extinct? Oh no, there's another kookaburra bird, I can't get anywhere close to it. Why are we dying up? What are we doing? Or my friends. No, sorry, too personal. Don't worry, we'll get further. So, they had their smart people, and the smart people would ask questions. But there's a problem. Because nothing had changed. So then the question becomes, what did the Aborigines do with their smart people? With their skeptics?
Oh no.
Negative.
Which brings us to cannibalism. If I eat his brain, I'll get smarter. No, it's a very important question. How could things possibly have stayed the same so long? Well, we know the answer. Which is when you have curious people in your society, you can either listen to them, or you can kill them. Yeah, I mean, it's either physical or it's genetic death, right? So the physical death is, rock to the head. What's the genetic death? No women, right? Yeah, you drive them out, or nobody will have sex with them. At which point they tie their hair blue and demand an umbrella. I'm sorry, this umbrella thing. I'm obsessed with it, so it's gonna be an annoying.
It's hilarious.
But that's important. So we have the Western culture, which says, okay, don't get me wrong. Sometimes we'll kill them. No. Give me people who died for being free thinkers or were killed in Western history.
Hitler.
Positive that being a free thinker requires you have a giant Panzer army. Because, if that happens, please let me know. But, yeah, we got Socrates. Galileo was tortured, but I don't think he was killed at that point. Reformation, reformers, yeah, people who questioned the Christendom's hold upon the religious text, the teaching of the Latin Mass, Anabaptists, and believed in adult baptism, which of course meant that the other religious groups drowned them, saying, no, that's your two John F. Kennedy, yeah, he had some questions about the Federal Reserve, which he never quite got to finish asking. Gaddafi, well, I don't know about free thinker, but he was a nice barrier between Africa and everything else. So in the West, we let a good chunk of the free thinkers live. I mean, you don't try to ostracize them, right? I mean, that's the media's job, right? This is to build this fiery mode of negative language against anybody who asks difficult questions. But that's incredibly civilized compared to most other cultures, right? Where you kill your son to death or something. So you have a culture in the West where we allow for free speech. We allow for criticisms and questions and so on. And after about 2.5 months, we'll even allow Canadians into the country. It's amazing. Still hypothetical. And we have another culture, the Aborigine culture, which basically takes anybody who asks questions, calls them evil, and hits them on the head with a rock for the most part, or kills them one way or another. And there's a price to be paid for killing off your free thinkers. There's a price to be paid for the artificial certainty of deadly dogma. And it's a very high price. I mean, everybody likes it, it seems, except for us, right? Everybody likes this kind of certainty. I know what the sun is. I know why we're here. I know what the rules are. And that kind of certainty is tempting, isn't it? Like, that's it, no more questions. Right? That's it. I got an answer. I'm going with it until I'm dead. And that's very tempting. But there's a huge price to be paid for the sin of vanity, because it is the sin of vanity. Because to be both certain and wrong is to stagnate as an individual, as a culture, as a country, as a society. And we all know, right? We all know people in our lives who are both absolutely certain and absolutely wrong. And they won't listen to counter evidence, and you can't talk them out of their position, and they reject all reasoning that goes contrary to their preferences. And they stagnate as individuals. It's like when you're driving home, you get home, what do? You stop driving, because you're home. It's the same thing. If you got an answer, it's the answer. And we continually have this creative destruction of questioning the most treasured value, questioning the most fundamental absolutes, which makes us the most progressive culture in the true sense of the word, that there's actually progress. But it also makes us incredibly vulnerable for reasons I'll get to in a few minutes. Because the fundamental virtue is doubt. Is doubt. Because without doubt, you can't get anywhere. Because if you're certain, which almost always means that you're wrong, certainly throughout human history before science, reason, philosophy, evidence, and so on, you'd be wrong. And it's tempting, and it's so destructive. It's a straitjacket. You know where your arms are, but you can't use them for anything. And so this culture in the West, let some free thinkers live, have some free speech, have some skepticism, have some criticism, which is really around having empathy for your future self, right? Like, why do we question ourselves? Because we want to be better in the future. Why do we go to the gym? So we can lift things tomorrow, right? I mean, it's having some empathy for your future self. Whereas only having empathy for your comfort in the moment means that you're incredibly claustrophobic and restrictive. And again, I'm not kidding. This is why the leftists and the sort of nobles, this is why they love the noble savage myth, because they're the same damn people. They're certain they're wrong, and they attempt to crush and destroy opposition to their fantasies. Reality to both groups is blasphemy. Doubt is violence. Questions are destruction. There's a reason why the noble savage comes out of the left. There's a reason why the protesters comes out of the left. And do not fool yourselves for a minute. We know this. We know this in this room, down in our core, that the violence that the Aborigines perpetrated against their free thinkers is exactly the violence the left would love to perpetrate against us, if they could. The question of guilt is interesting, and it's foundational to what we're talking about, what I'm talking about here. So, anybody knows where the phrase trial by fire comes from? Which one? They would sometimes test witches by this. Anyone else? Sorry?
In the 12th century, they abandoned trial by
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so, yeah, the trial by fire was, you're accused of a crime, and it doesn't necessarily mean theological crime or blasphemy, it's just accused of some crime. And, you know, it's getting 12 people together and looking stuff up and evidence, that's all. But the people who found it all so troublesome now, they're reporters. But, so what they would do is they'd say, here's a red hot piece of metal. Pick it up. Take 3 paces. Not 4. That'd be crazy. Take 3 paces, put it down. If your wounds heal, you're innocent. Okay. So that was the goal back then. And then of course they said maybe that's not a good methodology, so you've got trial by jury of your peers, you've got confront your accuser, you've got rules of evidence, you've got objections, you've got, you know, the whole common law thing, which is rational, because we don't know who's guilty. We don't know who's guilty. There's doubt. Doubt is progress. And we've got this constant undertow, right? I mean, I don't know how it works in Australia, but in America, under Title IX and in other places, if you're a college student or whatever, you're accused of sexual misconduct by a woman or whatever, is it infected here too, where it's starting, right? Stop it. Whatever you do, stop it. This is medievalism. I mean, at least with medievalism, you had a chance that your wound would heal. Good luck with these high line courts, these dark chambers. This is totalitarian in its essence. And it's weaponization of gender versus gender, sex versus sex, which is horrible. The Aborigines, when it came to accusations, if you were a woman and you were accused of breaking rules in some way, anybody know what the punishment was?
Speed in the back of the leg.
That's way too humane. That was for men. Yeah, so if you were a man and you were accused of it, then you would do this like dance thing where they'd throw spears at you, and if you got hit, you were guilty. It still makes more sense in the Russian collusion theory, but but you know what it was for women? I hope you will follow me along. I'm not just saying that for no reason. Get ready! So if you were accused of something, then you could forfeit your life, or they'd say, well, if you let us take you out into the bush and the elders can all gang rape you, we'll consider the matter closed. In other words, if you're horny, accuse someone and off you go. Wait, was that because of my word? I couldn't tell. Was that just a groan of horror? Or I don't even know what happened there.
Bit of both.
Good about that, okay. Yeah, no, this is horrifying, right? This is horrifying. The punishments were brutal and vicious, and the amount of torture that was inflicted upon the young literally staggers the imagination. So I learned how to pronounce cicatration. Anybody want to know what? Okay. This is like the world's most horrible home videos where you're like, oh. Sorry? Please? Really? You sure? It's a dark place. All right. So you've seen the Aborigines, they have these ridges, right? Have you seen this, these scarred ridges? So the way that you produce those is you get a stone knife and you slice the body. And then into the body you rub clay and or ash. And when you do that, there's these ridges that form, you know, like the lashback of somebody in the Middle East who said something that somebody didn't like. And this is called cicatration. And there's rituals that go like crazy in order to achieve this. If you want to get married, there's a couple of things that can happen. And marriage, not really the same, there's a lot of polygamy and so on, but the marriage rituals, if you were going to get married, nothing you'd be promised to the man at birth. And you would be taken out by the women of the band into the bush, and they would ritually befoul you with something called a digging stick. I know. I'm like, I've never been happier that there's a book without illustrations. Or, alternatively, if you were going to get married, the elders would take you out for the aforementioned gang rape, right? A warm-up. No, but you understand that this is very destructive to the family unit, right? No, because if there's a gang rape before the marriage, then nobody knows who the kid is, right? There's no particular father that can be ascertained, which means that you can't have any in-group kinship preferences, which means you can't have any progress, because you can't favor your own children over other people's children and so on. And there were these huge rules as well. Remember I say that the leftists and the Aborigines have some things in common. You could not keep your stuff. I'm not going to mention that as well, but you couldn't keep your stuff. So if somebody was short of food and you had any kind of excess food, you had to give it to them. You had to. Which means that the people who plan and the people who save don't get to keep their stuff. Which means that you don't get any IQ progress over time, right? You know how the Europeans, one of the reasons that we ended up with the higher IQs is the winter, right? The winter, well, sorry. I wish I'd had pictures for you in Australia. I can't see you. You're coasting from the winter to fortunes. I say this with jealousy at times, but yeah. So in the winter, you had to store all your stuff, and if you didn't do the right math and you didn't save your food, you'd die off. And so the people who were able to defer gratification, plan, and do all this kind of stuff ended up smarter. And there were these selection pressures. The fire people and the ice people is one of the theories that I think is pretty good around this. So they socialized everything that you had, right? So if you had anything extra, you had to give it to other people, or they'd kill you, whatever, right? So they had a welfare state.
The original communists.
They were. Actually, communism, well, I mean, it's childhood, but that's a different thing. So, now the other thing that they said was because this conservatism didn't just extend to the rules, it didn't just extend to the social relations, it extended to changing anything in your environment. Anything. So you couldn't have any agriculture. I mean, soil in Australia is pretty good. And there's luckily a lot of dry places. A lot of places you can grow stuff pretty well, but they weren't allowed to, and they scorned it as wasteful. So you couldn't alter your environments, and you had to redistribute everything you had. So you got your socialism, and you got your environmentalism. altering this bad for nature, right? These beliefs go in parallel. Socialism is a re-eruption of some extraordinarily primitive ideas that held our species back for tens of thousands of years, and it's trying to do it again, trying to return us back. You know, next Venezuela is like 3 steps to go to the original Aborigines. So, when it came to the punishment of children, I mean, just being a child was horrendous in these situations, and I know it's still horrendous in many Aboriginal communities, because, well, first of all, you would be very lucky to survive as a child. Anybody know what percentage of Aboriginal children were killed after birth? Sorry? That's the high end of the estimates that I've seen, the 30 to 50%. Who's good at math? We got any math people out there? All good. There's that certainty without evidence. But all right. 40,000 years. I've seen a bunch of estimates, 150,000, 600,000 indigenous, right? 40,000 years. Let's assume a generational cycle. Let's be very generous and say 20. It seems to be a little bit less from time to time. You got 40,000 years, you got generation, 2 decades, and you got 30 to 50% of babies being killed. What kind of death count is that? 10,000. This man cannot do your taxes. Cannot, or can he? We're done. It's, I mean, you can do the math and it goes extraordinarily high. Now, and this is the thing that drives me nuts about this moral relativistic, postmodernistic garbage, which is, if the Europeans had come over and killed 30 to 50% of the Aborigine babies, can you imagine? It would never be legal. You were instructed as a senator, as somebody, certainly if you were at all representative of the government, you were instructed to treat the natives as equals, to treat with them, to deal with them, to protect them, to never enslave them, to... But if the Europeans had come over and killed 30 to 50% of Aborigine babies, everybody would go mental. Of course, and rightly so. Because... Sorry? Well, we'll get to that. We'll get to that myth in a few minutes. But no, but think about it, right? So, if the Europeans had killed 30 to 50% of the Aborigine babies, that would be monstrous, beyond, like evil beyond words. But you see, if the Aborigines do it, it's culture. You must respect it. This is insane. Like, literally, this is moral insanity of the very first order. As a philosopher, I don't care who's killing the babies. I don't care if the person is white or the person is not white. The babies are still being killed. Do you know how they killed the babies? Pour sand into their mouths. Dash their heads against rocks. Or just move and leave them behind. For what? Exposure, dirt, egos. Oh. No, should I? No. It's too easy. It's too easy. And there's been studies, I think about 350 very primitive, or certainly way pre-industrial societies have been studied. And abortion, infanticide abortion, universal. And the ways that the Aborigines in varieties of places would abort their babies is they would eat these bitter herbs. Or they would pound their bellies with rocks. Or they would get some sort of constriction, like I don't know, rope or something that would be similar to rope, and slowly tighten it around their bellies.
Sounds like Planned Parenthood.
A much lower head count than And again, if this had been done by the Europeans, if the whites had come over and poured sand into the babies' mouths or had tightened it, people would go insane. And it would be monstrously evil. But nobody talks about the Aborigines doing it. Why?
My culture, my
Money in making Aborigines feel guilty. Lots of money in making whites feel guilty. Right? We're this big giant vending machine of, oh, I'm so sorry, Lola. We're just terrible.
You know, I mean, what have we ever done for the world? What has Rome ever done for us?
I mean, what have we ever given to the world? I mean, a couple of things, but probably not that important. I mean, logic. Oh, there was that end of slavery thing. I mean, you think that would count for something. You know, slavery, a universal phenomenon throughout all of human history, spanning 150,000 plus years. Every single culture enslaved every single other culture could get their hands on, until white Western European Christians spent untold amounts of blood and treasure to end the most barbaric practice in humanity. Hey, quick question. So one group ended slavery. Which group do you think is now only ever blamed for slavery? Just a quick question for anyone. Anybody? That's what it is. With their little tiny mouths. But no, it's horrendous. And what does this do to encourage societies to do good in the world? You know that old saying, no good deed ever goes unpunished. Well, what is the point of doing good in the world if it means that you now say, oh, you guys care about other people? Oh, wow, you guys have empathy? You have a moral system that goes beyond in-group preference? You have some sort of idea of universal human rights? You care about other bipeds? Oh, we could really screw you up with that. We can make you feel guilty for everything now, because you care. What else? What else do we give? Oh, free market. You know that thing that's lifting people out of poverty like never before in human history? Free market came out of the West. You know, because if the free market wasn't there, it wouldn't generate enough money that we could dump hundreds of billions of dollars on Africa, and so they could buy cell phones so they could get to Europe. It's a mixed blessing. But we've given so much amazing stuff. Like, objectively. Okay, here we go. Quick question. Ooh, math people. From 800 BC until 1950 AD, what percentage of scientific progress came from Europe and North America? #/ start including Mexico. Oh, you've been watching, haven't you? It is, in fact, 98% of scientific progress came from white people from 800 BC till 1950 AD. Come on. And science is why we're here. It's why most of us are alive. You like your teeth? You know, I mean, this is why we're alive. This is why we don't have an infant mortality rate of 30 to 50%. And it is my very great concern that we are the culture without this ferocious in-group preference. If you look at the Jews, if you look at the Muslims, if you look at a wide variety of other belief systems out there, other cultures out there, well, in general, they're going to pass to their own team. And we're engaged in a Nietzschean battle of cultures in the world. There's this chilly amoral space between cultures when they collide. If you think of it like a sports team, footer, it's here, right? Oh, footer. You know, you're not saving any syllables. But, you know, if you're in a football game, a footer game, and you pass to the other footy. I finally found something you care about. And it's a ball. Adjust your priorities, people. You know, more upset about that than sand going in a baby's mouth. You are tough people. I'm going to switch to rugby if that's all right. You're playing a rugby game. No, don't throw me off. No, seriously, don't throw me off. It's not very quick for you to do it. So, yeah, you're playing a rugby game. If you're passing You know there's no game going on at the moment. But if you pass to the other team, and they only pass to themselves, you're going to lose. you're going to live. Now, in the world that is, not the world we like there to be, but in the world that is, there is a battle, there is a fight. And it is an amoral fight. And we have tried, collectively speaking, we have tried for the past couple of hundred years, give or take. We have tried the strategy called no in-group preference. You know, it's the white guilt, white savior problem. You know, hey, we've got these great societies. Let's take them on the road. Let's take them overseas. Let's go and make other cultures and countries just like us. Like there was this mad fantasy in 2003 that you go and depose Saddam Hussein and take over in Iraq and you get this wonderful Jeffersonian democracy emerging out of the Middle East. Turns out, asterisks, no. Why? Well, cultural history, political, religious history, and IQ and AIDS. Sorry, IQ and AIDS. And there's no culture, no country that has an IQ average below 90 that sustains anything close to a free society. Just doesn't happen. And so we have tried this universalism, we have tried this no in-group preference. And we have tried to remake the world in our own image. How's that going? Horrible. That's terrible. It's terrible. I wish it wasn't. I wish it wasn't. But it is not working. And it is catastrophically not working. And then we say, well, you know, there's bad things that happen in the world, and there are these refugees, you see. We've got to save them. I don't remember, in, say, the Second World War, all of these other countries and cultures opening themselves up to white people. Saudi Arabia wasn't saying, oh, is there a war in Europe? Here you go. Oh, here you go. I'm going to build all the churches you want. Worship freely? Absolutely. Oh, you know what we're going to do? Just because we're Saudis and we're just, you know, that's how we roll. We're going to pay you 10 times what you can make in Europe for nothing. Just, you don't have to work. We'll give you free healthcare, free dentistry. I don't remember any of that. You know, every single time there's a virgin soil epidemic because of human movement, right? It's always the whites brought these smallpox-ridden blankets and, you know, draped it and threw it and killed. It's not true. It's not true. Smallpox, okay, how long did it take to get from England to Australia in the 1700s? Sorry? I think they got it down to 8 with a good wind. Still fair. Well, actually, Qantas was pretty good, but sometimes it was traveling with a 9. Anyway, so, yeah, you've got 8 months, right? Now, do you think if you've got smallpox on the boat for 8 months, do you think they'd be like, yeah, you can stay? Sure. No, they gave you smallpox to the sharks. Now, Indonesia, a little closer, right? Indonesia, you can sail back in the day in 2 weeks, 10 days, 2 weeks. Funnily enough, that's actually kind of the incubation time of smallpox. So it's almost certain that smallpox came to Australia to the Aborigines through Indonesia, not through the British, not through the whites. It's just a lie that you've been told, because if you feel bad, you'll give money. It's just a shakedown. It's not a moral. I mean, the left, they don't believe in morals. They believe in the acquisition of resources. They're amoral predators of manipulation and exploitation. And this is not my theory. You still read Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. This is very, very clear. Do what works. Get your resources. Lie, cheat, steal, doesn't matter. And if you respond to that, you understand, like if you say, ooh, yeah, collective moral judgments hundreds of years ago for unproven historical allegations in which there's no eyewitnesses in record, yeah, sounds great. No, we'll give up our culture for that. That seems fair. You can't take any of this stuff seriously regarding the stolen generations, they call it, right? About 6% of the children were taken out of their Aborigine homes. Why? W's. sexual abuse, child abuse, neglect. Aborigines, terrible eyesight, lots of problems with ear infections and hearing loss because of neglect. I mean, if you guys have, I haven't spent time in the Aborigine areas here, but in Canada, I spent quite, when I worked up north after high school, I spent some time in the Indian, the native indigenous populations, and it's hell. Like, you couldn't design a society and an environment more conducive to produce human suffering. They are horrendous. Because it's a government program called Let's Help People, which means it destroys people. You know, it's like the I'll make or love me through kidnapping, you know, like it just produces the opposite effect. So, and all of the children who were taken to the Aborigine home, all of the white families were subjected to exactly the same rules. Exactly the same rules. So, again, it's just another lie. And it's not to help the Aborigines. The Aborigines are not being helped in the current situation. It's to extract resources from good people who care about others. But in order to get you to give up your resources, they have to convince you in such a thing as collective historical moral judgment. Can you imagine anything more insane than collectivist historical moral judgment? Even if we accept that all of everything that I looked up turned out to be a lie, like all of these genocide and this and that and so on. Not true. Like, I couldn't find anything. You know, you look up this massacre, you hear massacre, oh my gosh, you know. So I'm used to massacres like the Muslim takeover of India. Anybody know the death count of that? 80 million. 80 million people. Genghis Khan. You know, they're building statues for the guy. They're building statues, nobody's tearing those statues down. I don't know, there's a monster. So I'm thinking massacre, wow, 80 million people. That was bad. 12, someplace, 8. One place was an estimate somewhere between 1 and 1,000. I want to cater lunch. How much? Somewhere between 1 and 1,000. Narrow that down? No. Because I can only prove 1, but 1,000 makes people guilty and they give me money. The Queensland estimate for the number of Aborigines killed, 10,000. Anybody know where this number came from?
Someone's boss.
That's an insult to an ass, really, come on. And an ass serves a function. So, yeah, so there were 800 more or less verified white deaths at the hands of Aborigines, and the guy said, yeah, it's got to be at least 10 to 1 the other way. Sure, why not? Oh, and he's like, well, that's not really a round number, it's like 20%. Sounds like science to me. I think they call that a Ponzi scheme in finance. So the question is, what do you do? Well, the first thing is we have to restore some sense of moral sanity to the discussion. Spoiler, you're not responsible, even if all the accusations are true. Second spoiler, the accusations are not true. Because you try being a white person and making collectivist judgments about another race. How does that go? Yeah. You know, Aborigines for some crimes are 19 times more likely to commit them than white people. Can you collectively judge Aborigines for that? Of course not. But that's in the present, where there's verified multiples of 19 times more likelihood of criminality. Can you collectively judge that? Morally, no. I mean, don't get me wrong, it might be worth knowing the odds if you're wandering around, you know, and you got to be alert, right? You got to know the facts. But you can't judge every Aboriginal by the fact that there's 19 times more likelihood of committing a crime. But you go back 200 years to completely unverified, politically motivated, vending machine, white guilt, kick-up nonsense, and somehow you're supposed to feel guilty. Hey, feel that that's kind of familiar? Okay, who here was raised Protestant or Catholic or? Yeah, you ever hear this story like something really bad happened in the past? People made bad moral decisions in the past, and now you're responsible for it. Does that seem familiar? There's a reason why this stuff clicks with us, right? The leftists are taking over as predatory collectivist secularists. They're taking over the stories of Christianity. Leftism is just a new religion that the state is God, and the devil is themselves. But this idea, you understand, the noble savage, that's just Adam and Eve before the fall. This is why it works so well within our minds and our hearts, right? And then they fell from grace, right? The curse of adultery, right? You eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and next thing you know, Eve has to give birth to children, and Adam has to work, and it's all downhill from there. And the priesthood, at least for a long time, would say, well, you see, because of original sin, which you didn't do, but you're responsible for, you got to pay us money. And if you pay us money, we'll forgive you a little bit for a little while, but come back next week and give us some more money. Does any of this sound familiar when it comes to the Aboriginals? Bad things happened in the past. You didn't do them, but you're responsible. Hey, I got a good idea. Give us some money. We'll not attack you for a little while, you feel, but you're going to come back next week and give us some more. Now, you understand, if you keep feeling guilty and you keep paying, it will never, ever end. The guilt is a form of selfishness. I know that sounds a little odd, but I think it's true. Tell me if you think it's not true. But the guilt is a form of selfishness. Why? Because if you speak the facts, if you speak the truth, if you reject this idea of collectivist historical moral condemnation, which somehow you're responsible for paying off the unconfirmed debts of people you have no idea who they were or what they did, if you push back against that, what are you called?
Racist.
Well, you're called racist anyway. You're carbon-based. You're white. You're a racist. I mean, that, yeah, you're called bigot, racist, a cold-hearted, xenophobe, genocide denier, whatever it's going to be, right? But that's just verbal abuse, right? So verbal abuse is how weak people get resources from strong people. You understand? They can't fight you. Right? They can just just manipulate you, make you feel good, make you feel bad, right? Enact you. Here, take the money, just leave me alone for 5 minutes. Sure, I'll be back in 5 minutes. There is a form of selfishness because if we don't learn how to say no to this form of verbal abuse, this horrific extraction of our resources, our culture, and our children's future, for the sake of just avoiding being called a horrible word for 5 minutes or so. Because you understand, like, I mean, the racist thing too, like a real racist wouldn't care. You know, you go to some guy with a KKK mask and, you know, you say, you know, you're a racist. He's like, oh. You see this? I'm not imitating the pyramids. You're bald. Testosterone and time, that's my heritage. You only care about being called a racist because you don't like collectivist moral judgments. But if you're only being called a racist because you're resisting collectivist moral judgments, that seems like a fight worth having, I think. We have to be courageous in the most difficult way. You know, it's funny. We got Western civilization, all of the great and accumulated glories, all of the freedoms and wealth that countless tens of millions of people died to hand to us. We've got all that versus one two-syllable word. Isn't that wild? We have nuclear weapons versus one two-syllable word. It's an astounding moment in history. And the funny thing is, I virtually guarantee you that if there was some invader coming across your borders, not the ones being paid for by the government, but if there was some invader coming across your borders and you were conscripted, you would go, right? You would fight. I mean, the soldier doesn't fight because he hates what's in front of him, but because he loves what's behind him. You would fight. And that's the most amazing thing, is we're being asked to fight a battle that is not physical in nature, that is spiritual, that is moral in nature. Because men will to save the West. Men will pick up weapons. We know this because it's happened repeatedly throughout history. Pick up weapons and fight and die. And that seems easier than standing up against this two-syllable word. Isn't that weird? That you'd rather face bullets than syllables. Because bullets won't save this. But resisting this word will. And that is the great moral challenge we face. So don't fail, and thank you very much. Anybody else? Is it just me? Is it the man? Yeah. Oh, there we go. Okay. Oh my gosh, there's people out there. I thought it was just me. So we're going to do a little Q&A, and don't forget, we've got books to sign if you want. I hate to do this little housekeeping crap, but we've got books to sign and all that, and we'll do selfies if you're at all interested. Although when I do take a selfie with me and smile, the only thing that shows up is my teeth. I think it's lovely. All right, so you're going to come in? So you can line up in the middle? Line up in the middle. Okay, go ahead.
How good was that? Has anybody been to those speeches with Q&As where somebody gets on the microphone and has a 5-minute preamble before they finally get to the question? Meet the mic nuts. If you try to put your hands on the mic, it's going to get further away from you. I'm holding it. We're going to queue up here behind Imam Tawhidi. He's going to be our first question this evening. So if you've got a question, please queue up down the side wall along the bar behind the Imam. We'll get started. We're going to finish at 10:30 sharp, so we've only got time for probably a few questions, I'm sorry. If the line gets really long, you're probably going to miss out. But because we want to get 3 questions as quick as we can, we're going to be really strict about keeping it to a quick question. So no preambles, please just ask your question. At 10:30, the guys will be available to sign merchandise. So we'll queue down the left-hand side to buy merchandise, and we'll queue down the right-hand side to get autographs and selfies. Which will also be excellent. Imam Tawhidi, come on up and ask your first question.
When I spent 4 months in North America in Washington, D.C., meeting with politicians, leaders of organizations, speaking about the same problems that we face. Extremism, special treatment to these minorities that we damage and so on. The question is, has the West become weaker or have the extremists become stronger?
It's also thank you, Mr. Tawhidi, for his involvement tonight.
Hello. There we go. I think there's a push and a pull effect that goes on. When people show weakness, then the stronger that is amplified. So as the West's identity is disintegrated more and more, and as we show ourselves to be so kind of lost and we're not sure what we are losing our Christian heritage, we're losing our family values, we're losing our communities. We tend to see people get more attracted to these cultures that are more dominant, as I was saying in my speech. So that's why we're seeing the second generation of immigrants find themselves looking back to their home cultures and trying to reassert those cultures. It's definitely a push and pull effect. So yes, the West is getting weaker, and yes, the extremist factions are getting stronger at the same time.
That's a logical fallacy right there.
Hi, like everybody else in this room, everyday criticism used to have everyday job until I spoke up. However, my question to you is, who's helping
Well, there are certainly some people that I know or follow online who are big fans and working for him. I think this is kind of a collective endeavor. I mean, Julian Assange handed the West Donald Trump, to be frank. We know that, right? Because if the emails should not be published, it would be known, right? If the evidence on in the Democratic primary, it seems unlikely that Trump would not. Yeah, I mean, the bravery is absolutely astonishing, and there are rumors at the moment that Ecuador is kicking him out, perhaps extradited to the UK, where he's going to end up in America, where he could face, just speak up. I mean, I wish there was some magic wand. We don't have the political authority to be able to enforce what we would like. It should be a pardon, if not a praise, if not compensation, but just keep speaking out, make people aware of the good that the man has done. And he's a true knight, a warrior in the information age for truth. And just make people aware of it. Don't let the lies and the slander overtake his reputation, which of course is what they're trying to do, so they can do all the other unholy things they want to do. Well, okay, if he can't succeed, how can any of us? That is an excuse. That is not reasonable. He ended up really poking in a hornet's nest of massive amounts of military, industrial, and political power. Nobody's saying we all have to do that individually, right? I mean, but there's a lot that you can still do without looking at somebody who's really paid a very high price and saying, well, I can't do anything then.
Thank you. Next question.
First, I'd just like to say, Assalamu alaikum to you, man. You're not the only Muslim here. But my question is actually about the Aborigines. So I live in Northern Territory where we have ads on TV telling them to wash their faces because they don't really do that. And my question is, keeping it, with the idea of race and IQ, we want to keep low IQ people out. But what about the indigenous people who have such a low IQ? What would be your question for them?
So, sorry to interrupt, but this is what I studied. So, the answer to everything is freedom. The answer to everything is freedom. The government will not help them. The government wishes to create a permanent underclass that is dependent upon the states that will always fight anyone who wants to cut taxes. Right? To set us at war against each other, right? The best way to keep slaves is have them attack each other. Well, then you don't need to pay for that much enforcement. So the government will not help these individuals. There could be many, many ways to help these individuals, but the first thing we need to do is have an open discussion of the limitations. And this is around race and IQ as a whole, as I was talking about on the Volt show. So I don't know what the answers are, but I do know that we need to start having discussions about the facts and reality. And people say, well, what if that generates racism? It's like, no. Because we're not talking about it, whites are to blame for everything, which is kind of racist. So we're not solving the problem of racism by pretending there's no such thing as genetics and race and IQ. We need to have frank and open discussions about that because we have this false answer, which is white privilege and white racism is responsible for everything, which makes that emu story look like science.
Thank you, sir.
Lauren, pretty much 2.5 years ago, I was watching a Mile Up video.
Let's get to the question.
Yeah, and I found things about the video. I was like, who's the 20-year-old doing that rape video? And
Take some breaking for you.
7 of us, including my uncle, you can see.
Question.
Next!
It's a vicious crowd, man. You gotta hurry. Kind of looking like jackals.
Is rape a legitimate charge?
Sorry?
Is rape a legitimate charge?
I think people, thank you for the question, yeah. I think people can legitimately be raped, yes.
Sometimes by alcohol.
Someone had too much fun tonight, that's okay.
Too drunk.
Alex Jones reckons that most of the population are mentally retarded. Do you believe that? And if so, how do you go about making real change and educating the public?
I don't know if I would use the word retarded as that implies an actual deficiency, but there is certainly a large percentage of the populace, the majority who are not tuned in to what is actually going on. the majority of YouTube videos that are watched, all it takes is opening up the YouTube trending section and most watched videos to see what the majority are looking at. And it's like, what is it? The kids eating soap challenge? What is that called again? Tide Pod challenge. That's what people are watching. That's what people are doing, right? Most people are not engaged with politics right now. So that's why I personally believe the best way to engage people, oh, and this is the scary part too, is a lot of people vote. A lot of people who are not engaged in politics vote. Can we change this? How can we get people engaged? Conservatives, a lot of the time, think the way to do this is, I'll just show you the facts. Look at these numbers. Everything is going to be destroyed if we keep spending like this. And no one cares to look at numbers. Numbers give us anxiety. Conservatives have to learn how to get involved in all aspects of life, like the left did. The left did their long walk through the institutions. It's time for the conservatives to do their walk through the institutions, to get into art, to get into media, to get into Hollywood, to make movies and shows that are based around conservative principles and ideas, because not everyone is going to be convinced by numbers. That's not everyone's learning tactic and strategy. So we got to diversify. Diversity of ideas is our strength.
I was just wondering, understanding the cycles of civilization, aren't we just doomed again? Aren't we going to go through another 100 years of just saying we'll build progress like the Victorian times and then we're going to fall into the same nihilist, decadent, over bureaucratic fall, whether it comes from China or Russia, whatever comes after that, and aren't we just doomed again? Is a utopia possible?
So is it utopia possible? Yeah. I don't believe in the idea of utopia. I never have. I've always believed in the idea of best of the worst. I don't think capitalism is perfect. I think it's the best of the worst. I think it still comes with many problems. I don't think democracy is perfect. It certainly is not. It's caused a lot of problems for us. It's the best of the worst. But as we cycle, the cycle I mentioned in my speech, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, repeating itself. The hope is that we can break that cycle, or at the very least, that we are not the weak men that destroy our civilization.
But yeah, don't historical inevitabilities are a way of excusing yourself from individual action. There are no inevitabilities in history. It's not physics. It depends upon willpower and commitment and just the capacity to stand up and show the kind of courage that ignites other people to act in a similar manner. You know, we can act together in a way that is very difficult to do when we feel isolated. And why do we feel isolated? Because they smack down anyone who stands up and speaks the truth. Stand up and speak the truth, you become this electric current that jumps from person to person. Next thing you know, we've turned the tide, because we have this amazing no gatekeeper capacity to talk with each other. Why are we all here? Because there's an internet. Because we would never be on TV. I mean, good heavens, that's like we're just not good at propagandizing people, so why would they give us that? I mean, well, sorry, you are on TV, like, but no, just stand up. This inevitability is a fashionable way of saying, I don't want to act right. Okay, if you don't want to act right, then don't be in the room. But if you want to be in the room, just act right, be courageous, and there's nothing that has to be inevitable about tomorrow.
This question kind of directed at Stefan. Obviously this has been
Oh, sorry, I know this one. It's L'Oreal.
I was trying to figure that out. It was on top of mine. Obviously it's nice to be like a pro-Western culture, sort of pro-Western values, that sort of thing. Obviously I've watched your videos for a couple of years, and you're obviously a self-proclaimed atheist, that sort of thing. Some would argue that a lot of Western culture is based on Judeo-Christian values, and you're probably one of the strongest, you and Laura are one of the strongest of talking about Western culture and promoting it and that sort of thing. So when people would say to you, that obviously Western culture is based on Judeo-Christian values, but you're an atheist, do you think those two things are mutually exclusive?
No, not at all. No, so, I mean, do you know what the medieval theologians called Aristotle? The philosopher. The philosopher. They had extraordinary respect for Socrates, for Plato, for, even the Greek historians and so on. There has always been ample room within the Christian theology for the incorporation of rational ideology, rational thought. The Catholic Church and the Protestant churches were very instrumental in bringing about the scientific revolution. They hoarded knowledge from the ancient world. Christianity has always had a very open tent because it's universal. It's a universalist philosophy. It's not just an in-group philosophy. And so the idea that there is somehow some hostility between rational thought and Christianity at its finest is false. And of course, there are fundamentalist Christians, but there are even more dangerous fundamentalist atheists. You know, the problem with being an atheist is you have to hang out with other atheists, which I really don't do anymore, because they're horrible people for the most part. No, they are. No, they're much more, see, I can live next door to a Christian, and the Christian is like, you don't believe? Okay. But if I live next door to an atheist who worships the state, and I don't want to pay my taxes for his crazy program of mass migration, it's like, well, you go to jail with it. Atheism is ridiculously intolerant, and if you want to know what's drawing fundamentalism into the West, it's the fundamentalism of our worship of the state, which is a lot of it is driven by secularism. It's like a Stormy Daniels scene.
Okay. It's not a complicated question, but when I first arrived here, I was having a conversation with someone from Channel 10. It was media, CNC, and it was in regards to people didn't hear quite anymore. But anyway, I just want to know officially, and hearing from your mouths directly, that you don't stand for racism or sexism, but you just stand for clear-cut freedom of speech. Is that official?
No, I understand, but I just want to say, I have no respect for those terms anymore. They mean absolutely nothing. If you are a public figure that has not been called a racist, you would be the first. The word racism is used to shut down conversations of immigration. It is used to shut down conversations and ideas that must be spoken about, and that word means nothing in our society anymore. It has been cheapened.
I would also say that after a whole speech about the need for reason and evidence, bring your proof or get lost.
And my friends aren't actually aware of this, but when I was late because we went out for dinner.
Yeah, that's important. Please tell us more about your social life.
Yeah, anyway, I just want to know your views on this situation. So I hopped in the car and I was driving to dinner before you. I mentioned Lauren Southern. Anyway, I mentioned Lauren Southern, and he actually pulled over. He was an Uber driver, and he actually pulled over and told me to get out of his car, and that's why I was 25 minutes late.
That's why he's an Uber driver.
Welcome to the world we're in. Welcome to the world we're in. They're so utterly intolerant of other people's ideas and other opinions that they want the whole world to be blind with them. And I'm sorry that happened to you. It's the world we're in, and we got to fight back.
I hope you won, so.
Yeah.
Hey, this question also for Lauren. It's just you're only 23 and you've done so much with your life so far. Like you've run political parties and you've worked for the Rebel. And I was wondering, what do you think gets someone like you so successful and like so? Like you're amazing. You're an inspiration. How have other people been like you?
There's a C.S. Lewis quote, and I mentioned this to someone recently, which says, anyone who ever tries to be original in art and media or any other field, 9 times out of 10, they're not going to be able to come up with anything original. But if you just try to tell the truth, if you just try to be honest, almost 100% of the time you're going to find yourself being original in a world that's, quite frankly, lying most of the time. So I had no idea I was going to end up here. I had no plans to end up on this stage tonight. I just quite frankly saw the world as it was and started telling the truth, despite what people said about me. So I couldn't tell you how I got here. I got here by telling the truth. And it seemed to work out okay. And this isn't the easiest job either, though. I don't know if you You want to be on the forefront of slander, but it's worth it. It's worth it for the world we're fighting for.
I think it's very worthy today. Just depends which state you're as a young lad, I think most of us here probably did Australian studies. I think everyone can relate to that. But probably 3/4 of Australian studies is Aboriginal culture. I was the person where one of my early questions was, why didn't the Aborigines invent the wheel? Anyway, for years the only answer I ever got was they didn't need it.
And that's probably someone who drove to work.
That's right. So for years I was looking for the answer, never really got a satisfactory answer, and I came across the theory from Guns, Germs and Steel by Jared Diamond. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but I was just wondering if you could very quickly go through some of your thoughts on how that ties into the cold and hot people type theories.
Well, yeah, so in Guns, Germs and Steel, there is this rejection of the IQ hypothesis in favor of, and it's quite complicated, access to agriculture, access to a variety of plants and so on, like the natives in North America, they just have the corn and just have to domesticate it, lack of burdens, animal burdens, burdens, beast burdens and so on. So it's a big complicated mess. I'm a bit of an Occam's razor guy. You know, I think brain volume probably has something to do with success in culture, and IQ tests are very, very predictable. They very successfully predict criminality, they very successfully predict educational levels, they very successfully predict things like income, a very, very strongly dose-dependent correlation. So I generally try to go with simple things rather than more complicated things, and in the opening of that book, he just airily dismisses the IQ hypothesis, which made it very tough to continue on, because when you know something very well and somebody just says, well, of course it's not true because it's racist, it's like, all right, so the rest of this is one now, you know? So, I mean, it's worth reading for sure, and do these things have a factor? Sure they have a factor, but the reality is that you can take a country like Germany and you can lay waste to it from end to end in the Second World War, and within a couple of years after it's all back together, you can drop 2 nuclear bombs on Japan, and you can have fire bombings of Tokyo and other cities to the point where 100,000 or more people die, and the country, the island, can be laid waste, and within a couple of years they're back up and standing. What? No, that's not true. You're saying another welfare program worked? Come on, man. It doesn't matter if it's welfare between the Allies and the Germans. No. The Marshall Plan was not even up and running when the German economy began to really get back on its feet. Why? Because Germany and Japan are 2 high IQ countries, and so they could recover from things that, look at the Jews who were fleeing the Holocaust in Europe, came to America with nothing. They had to leave their houses, they had to leave everything. They came with a couple of bucks, if anything, in their pocket. It took them 4 years to achieve income parity with whites in America. 4 years. And yet we still hear about slavery 150 years after the fact. Why? Because you have 2 distinct IQ populations. It predicts everything. It answers just about everything. And looking for other explanations while bypassing that one is not scholarship, it's propaganda.
I've got a question for both of you. What do you think of the whistleblower movement?
That would be Sargon's movement, correct? I've never understood there's constantly these new words coming out, whether it be alt-right, liberalist, alt-right, whatever. I honestly can't keep up with it, and I don't see the purpose for it. So I found myself no longer identifying with any of these terms that are always coming up, because what we find is that our culture will find a word like conservative, and it'll keep slandering it. They'll find a word like alt-right, alternative, it'll keep slandering it so that people have to move away. I'll just stick with what's simple. Here are my viewpoints. Take them as they are. I'm not going to put any labels on myself anymore. I know that's a very liberal thing to say, don't label me, but it seems that you have to do that these days.
You know, it's nice about science, there really aren't a lot of isms. Right? Like math, there's not a lot of isms. There's not a lot of geography isms. There's not a lot of astronomy isms, right? Because just reason and evidence. Let's just stick with that, forget the labels.
What about defending freedom of speech? You don't really have any push to defend that or regardless of what happens.
Or you should see the pushback in New Zealand. It's quite a thing. There's a lot of pushback. I think people don't know how degraded free speech has become because they're avoiding controversial topics. Because, you know, there's rights you have in principle that you don't have in practice. You know, like I guess I have the right to go and do a ballet tutu dance on the pool table in a biker bar, you know, but there's things that you actually have in practice. And what happens is people are shying away from particularly controversial topics because they're kind of getting the blowback. And so they're giving up their right to free speech, which they still have legally. But they're so afraid of the consequences that they don't have it in any practical sense. So what we do is we say, oh, I have to speak along. What I do is I say, okay, I'm talking about difficult issues. Yeah, you're going to get yelled at. Yeah, you're going to get slandered and so on. But people have a good sense for the truth. And people have a good sense for a good heart. You know, like I come from a place of a love of philosophy means a love of wisdom, a love of truth. I have a great love for the races. I have a great love for the genders. I want the world to be a happy and peaceful place, which is why I focus on doing what I'm doing. And I hope then people can say, just because they have the right in law, doesn't mean that I can assume I have the right in practice. And I want people to stop shying away from difficult topics, because then what will happen is, if nobody's willing to talk about it, they can take away your right to talk about it, and people will care less. And I don't want that to happen, because once that goes, once freedom of speech goes, it comes down to that. It always has a history, and it always will.
I think my question might relate to that. With the push of cultural Marxism that we're seeing at the moment, over time, can that evolve or devolve, say, moving into a political sphere? Like now at the moment, you can't say supposed things that are hateful about different races, religions, or what have you, I think in New South Wales, particularly at the moment that's starting. Do we then start running a risk of getting to the point where the government starts thinking, well, you can also now find that you're going to get sued, or it's illegal to stop saying things like stop shagging men, or anything that just criticises the political words, like saying, well, I don't like Bill Shorten, he's a wanker. Like, do you think we could end up in a position like that over time because of cultural Marxism, or are they really just two separate things?
They are definitely not separate. People don't seem to realize the threat of political positioning. What cultural Marxism is this is what they call it, the long walk to the institutions. It is a long walk, but they are reaching towards a destination. There's a saying by Mencius, I believe, Cthulhu swims slowly, but he always swims leftward. And when you don't want him to get to that end point, and that is it, it's positioning. Once they have indoctrinated populace to the institutions, then they can convince the populace to vote for their policies that they want. And this is the same with migration. No American army would allow the Taliban to slowly position themselves around them and to allow themselves to become a greater number around them. When you have migration of people who are completely and utterly incompatible with your values coming in en masse constantly, that is positioning to become a demographic majority in your country and then vote all of your values out. Everything that is happening right now is political positioning so that an attack can happen at some point that will absolutely be catastrophic.
Thanks for coming here. Drawing partly on what Lauren just said a moment ago, do you see, and I think you can guess as to when we might approach a tipping point where Western civilization becomes, as we know now, irreparably damaged? I think in terms of like the demographic changes that have been forced on Europe, certain parts of America, as well as attacks on the traditional institutions that we have, which have basically helped build us to where we are now, which is family marriage, rule of law, things like that. So I guess there's two time frames.
Some of the greatest political changes that have happened in the world have started in France, and I truly believe that watching France and what occurs there is going to be one of the greatest predictors we have for what happens to the rest of the West, because it's happening at such an expedited rate. They've got mass migration, they've already lost the suburbs, they've already got these insane progressive policies. Germany is a good one to watch as well, Sweden's a very good one to watch. See what happens in these countries in the next 20 years, and that will give you a good indicator of when that tipping point will be for the rest of us.
But don't wait.
Yeah.
Don't wait for the cake in 20 years. Oh, it's a bomb. So yeah, don't wait. I mean, the mathematics are very, very clear. The mathematics and demographics are very, very clear. Sweden is going to be 30% Muslim in a couple of decades. And that's a very concentrated demographic that's going to vote in a particular way, particularly for the left, right? The left is willing to cannibalize the future of the West in order to gain some voters. They lost the war of ideas, so now they're just trying the war of demographics. And it's extraordinarily dangerous business. And, you know, there's lots of arguments that say that immigration just has to stop. We have no idea whether the indications it's not going to work. And it's going to not work in a very catastrophic way. Look at places like Lebanon and so on. It's multi-ethnic, multi-religious, no common ground, no common language, no common history. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And it doesn't work in a very catastrophic way. And the idea that you take a pause in immigration to say, let's find out if it works, well, of course that's the only sane thing to do. Of course that's the only sane thing to do. But of course politicians don't want to be called, never heard that. And so, you know, can we overcome our fear of the two syllables to save what we inherited? That's the question, which only can be answered through action.
Good evening, Laura. Thank you for coming. I just got a question regarding, I guess, the UN and any particular, I'm just trying to gauge your reach, I guess, YouTube or on a global sphere, if you have any inside connections or networking with anyone in the UN.
I did the European Union. Yeah. Oh, that's fun secret connections. Well, I'll tell you about the European Union, because that's where I do have people that speak to and where I have connections. And I unfortunately, the UN, that's next. That's the goal, 5 years maybe. But right now, I was shocked when I was invited to speak at the European Union about my experience. If you don't know, I was banned from the United Kingdom earlier this year for a little social experiment. We won't get into that. But I was permanently banned on the grounds of quote-unquote racism, despite anyway, that's a whole other story. And the European Union, they invited me to come and speak about my experience, and I discovered that there were tons of politicians that loved what I was doing, that loved workplace funds, that loved politics, that were more nationalists, that were looking forward and to saving the West. And the problem is that I think for so long, right-wingers have gained this strong distrust of government, and rightfully so, that we've forgotten to kind of work with the people within the government that are trying to change things. We've always wanted to just, let me have my family, let me have my wife, leave me alone with government, and the people who have gone and decided we're going to try to do what the left does and infiltrate the institutions, they don't have much support and they don't have much backing because we all distrust it so much. I've gained a lot of sympathy for the people in government trying to change things, and there are people within the UN, there are people within the European Union, there are people in these institutions that are doing something that is so praiseworthy because they're trying to take down an institution for which pays them, that works for them. People like Nigel Farage, they want to collapse something that they are employed by, and we need to be backing these people up. We need to find them, and we need to prop them up and support them in all media. They are there.
I'm going to start with saying that basically given up on trying to convince leftists of anything trying to be useful. But we still have a lot of people who are, you know, center left, center, or right. And is there anything more that we can do, that we aren't already doing, to influence that group of people to keep us in the right? Because like here in Australia, we're pretty isolated from the problem countries that are flooding Europe and creating this disaster right now. And I want to be able to do something before it gets to a point where people are having to be physically shocked by what's happening in the sea to fix the problem. And by that time, it might be sort of too late, especially if you look at history.
I think the redefinition of compassion is something very important because we like to help people, we want the world to be a better place, And the problem is you take that altruistic desire to make the world a better place. If you can somehow convince people that making the world a better place means surrendering their resources, their children, their future to the government, then it's like, well, I really want to make the world a better place, and I guess that's how you do it. And so if you can point out to people that freedom, that liberty, that individualism, that moral responsibility, that charity, and all of these good things will actually help people in a way that the current system does. So like, here's a little argument you can give to people to say, well, we want to help the third world. It's like, well, maybe we should stop strip mining all the smartest people out of the third world to prop up boomer retirement schemes and real estate prices in the West, because it's really not fair. It's not like they have this massive oversupply. So like, the more smart people we take out of the third world, the worse the third world gets, which means the second tier of smart people want to get out, which means it gets even worse. And there's millions and hundreds of millions of people who can't get out. And if we keep taking all the smartest people, it doesn't make our society more smart, but it sure makes their society less functional. And it's a huge disaster. And foreign aid is taking money from the poor people in rich countries and giving it to the rich people in small and poor countries so they can buy weaponry from military industrial complex people to oppress their own population. So let's stop doing that kind of stuff. And food aid destroys local farmers to the point when the food aid stops, everyone starves to death. So maybe we can stop doing that. So there's lots of ways to redefine compassion to actually help people rather than just think you're helping people by surrendering your rights.
Let it out. Just like but of course, if you mention that, we get back to that two-syllable word.
Yeah, the gumballs are different colors.
Ladies and gentlemen, Stefan Molyneux and Lauren Sullivan. Thank you. T-shirts and DVDs to buy, and you can grab those, and they'll be back in 5 minutes to sign them for you. If you want to get autographs, please queue down the right-hand side of the auditorium, and if you want to get merchandise, please queue down the left-hand side as you go out.